Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're going to talk about Astro Bot. Why Astro Bot? If you look around my channel, this stands out as a bit of a different choice for a game. I've covered roguelikes, creature catchers, and action games, so a platformer stands out a little bit. I do enjoy platformers, but most of the best ones, like Mario, are owned by a company that is still notorious for not being very friendly to YouTube and other companies, so we'll be avoiding that series, and pretty much everything else that they publish, even if there are at least a couple series that are very near and dear to me as a gamer. I really didn't pay too much attention to Astro Bot when it first came out, but when it won Game of the Year in 2024 with me having little knowledge of it existing, I reacted the way everyone does when a game they don't know or likes wins. I said it didn't deserve it. I'm not going to go so far as to say I've changed my mind since then, but I have at least come to understand why it was nominated. Before you go to the comment section with pitchforks out, just hold off a little bit. I'll go into more detail about that towards the end of the video. So, first, what actually drew me in to play it? Simple, my daughter. My daughter was 3 the first time she asked if she could play a game with me on my PlayStation Portal. I was throwing attempts at Monster Hunter, basically recording footage for the channel because at that point I was still kind of figuring out what I wanted to do with it. So I needed something we could play together because most of what I have is not really young child friendly, not even necessarily because of the content, just because it's a little bit more on the complex side in terms of how it plays. I had heard of Astro Bot by this point, thanks to the Game of the Year win, and I remembered that there was a tech demo released with the PlayStation, and I knew vaguely that there was a connection between the two of them. So I tracked down the tech demo, downloaded it, and set her on my lap, and we sat around to try to play it, because I figured, platformer shouldn't be that hard to teach to a little kid. She and I ended up playing through the whole demo about 10 times. I would let her grab a few of the controls, like some of the shoulder buttons that control the special actions, and I would control the rest, and you just sort of figure out ways to let her take a little bit more control or a little bit less for each situation, setting her up to feel the sense of accomplishment you get when you actually manage to pull something off. And she was managing to slowly learn how to actually control the character and was successfully helping me. She eventually asked if we could play something else like the robot game, because that's what she calls Astro Bot. So I bought the full Astro Bot game. Right off the bat, if you're familiar with Mario, you'll be right at home with Astro Bot. Had Sony come up with this back when they first parted ways with Nintendo and ended up releasing the original PlayStation, they may have had a mascot that would have actually stuck with them a little bit longer than some of the other myriad of cartoon mascots that they came up with. And if you're not familiar with that, that's actually a really fun rabbit hole to go down. Sony has tried and tried and tried over the years to come up with a ton of different mascots, hoping one would stick. I think this one would have worked if they had pulled it out back when they were still being heavily compared to Nintendo. Alright, so instead of hats like you got in the last Mario game, you get power-ups that are normally in the form of some robotic animal. Like on the screen right now, he's using a chicken to act as a rocket pack. They fundamentally alter the way you play, and it ranges everything from a monkey power-up that helps you climb and requires tilting the controller, the rooster that I've got on right now that you can actually see in the background, a bulldog that lets you basically do what the rooster does, but instead of vertically, horizontally, and let you dash forward, kind of like the dog is leaping out to bite someone. And my daughter's favorite, snakes that basically act like springs on your hands and let you punch from a distance and grab distant objects. They also let you swing and do a couple other things. There's several more, but they're always integrated into the level in a way where you have to use them, so they don't feel as pointless as some of Mario's power-ups can feel. Like, the average Mario level, sometimes you get a power-up and it really doesn't feel like you need to use it unless you're going after something hidden. They're usually just a convenience feature. In this, they're actually integrated into the level design, and you really can't progress without getting it, and as such you can't miss it, and you also can't lose it. You don't lose them from taking damage, because if you take any damage at all, outside of boss fights, you die instantly and go back to a checkpoint. However, death isn't really a big problem on regular levels. There are ample checkpoints and important progress like picking up lost bots or puzzle pieces, which are the two big collectibles in this game. Those get saved every time you pick them up, even if you don't hit a new checkpoint. They'll even stay with you if you just straight up quit out of the level, because once you've beaten the level once, you can actually start it over and use some of your coins to buy a little bird that'll follow you around and help you find anything that you have missed. So even if it's a little bit tricky to get a particular item, you can kind of kamikaze it and then just hop back to the checkpoint and finish the level. Challenge levels, however, you have to complete in one go with no extra health. And the challenge levels come in a couple different designs. There are a few that you unlock from doing an alternate exit, and they have several things, and those actually do, I believe, have checkpoints. But then there are one-off ones that are significantly shorter up until you actually unlock the challenge level world, which has some significantly harder challenges. And then there's two like ultimate challenges. One that you unlock in the main hub for picking up most of the other bots in the game, and the one that you unlock in the challenge universe for actually beating all of the challenges. Those are almost hair-pulling difficult. Regular stages, though, are much more relaxed, and even if you're dying at certain points, you can usually very clearly tell why you died, and it's easy to go back and fix that and make it through them. Like, there aren't but maybe one or two of the regular stages that actually feel like they're putting any significant amount of pressure on you throughout the whole game. And we'll get into why those have that pressure point later. The spectacle of the game is worth taking a moment to focus in on. This is a gorgeous game. You can even see from just the simple gameplay in the background. It is an absolutely beautiful game. The art direction looks really nice. If you don't like this particular art style, it doesn't change, but most people that are enjoying platformers actually are okay with this kind of kids cartoonish art style. And they've done a really good job with it. The level designs don't grow old and are so varied you don't really feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again. I cannot find something to complain about with the visuals of this game, and it absolutely deserved the awards for that. From a gameplay perspective, the levels are like if you take the progression from Mario Wonderland, so an overworld map where you pick out levels, and the interactivity of the 3D Mario games for the levels themselves, it's kind of that combination of things. So not a giant overworld that you're exploring like in something like Mario Odyssey, but levels that you pick out, and then those levels are fully 3D and interactable, so a little bit more contained, but still pseudo open world. The levels generally push you to go from point A to point B, but there are at least a couple sections that open up and give you a little bit of limited explorability. And the main hub area is actually significantly more akin to a traditional 3D Mario level, with fully explorable areas and stuff to find that it doesn't really point you to quite as quickly. I mean, it's not that hard to find anything. Like, even some of the hardest to find secrets in this aren't that bad. And yet again, if you're really having trouble with it, you can go grab the chicken and come back to the beginning of the level, and it'll help you find stuff. There is one thing I enjoy in Astro Bot more than I enjoy in the last few Mario games, so let's jump the footage playing out ahead a little bit. At the end of each major area is a boss fight. So on screen you're seeing the boss for the third area, Lady Venomara. These follow the traditional rule of three that Nintendo became so famous for, mostly. There's a couple exceptions. And they all have some sort of gameplay gimmick you have to learn to get to the point where you can actually inflict damage. Like the Venomara fight, it basically follows a pattern of trying to hit you with the tail, then it throws out some eggs, it'll destroy part of the stage, throw out some venom at one point, and then finally, after you hit some rings on its tail, it enables you to do an uppercut to her chin using the chicken power-up from earlier. So after 3 hits of this, it does a few little variations from the rule of 3. I don't want to spoil every bit of detail about how these fights plan out, because they're some of the best aspects of this game, and there's only really 6 of them. So I'm not going to go into too many details about it. They're actually really fun to discover as you're going through. really enjoyable, and even though there's no real incentive to play them because you can pretty much get all the stuff out of them that you want to with one go, these are some of the levels that my daughter and myself found ourselves replaying the most. Like, the boss for the second level, which I, yet again, won't go into too much detail about. She can actually control the weapons for that one really well, so she likes to play that one. Let me control the motions in the camera to avoid stuff, and then she actually takes out all the enemies in the boss. So the bosses are really fun. A great aspect of this game, and almost worth playing it for on their own. So I'll let this play out just a little bit more so you can see what I'm talking about when opening up the damage phase. Falls down, and you heard her. But now we're going to cut it out before this part. Alright, so let's dive into the part of the game where I do have some criticisms. In the background, we're going into one of the challenge levels, and this is actually one of the easier challenge levels. But just as proof that I can actually do the harder challenge levels before we really jump into this criticism, this is my save file screen showing the one that I've been currently working on with my daughter and the one that we've cleared and completely finished out. So, I've done all the challenge levels at some point, just don't have them finished in the file that I was using to get footage for this video. But this one, not a particularly challenging challenge level. So, for the actual levels, they're definitely challenging. At least a good chunk of them are. I've gotten kind of used to it, so this one goes by pretty fast. And even at the time, this one was one of them that was relatively easy to beat with one go. The problem is, some of them heavily involve the gyro controls, and this is most apparent whenever you're having to actually do the monkey climb. It's okay if they actually have synced up really well with the system, and part of this may have been exacerbated by the fact that I was playing on the Portal rather than playing directly on the console most of the time. But if they got even slightly out of sync, it was actually really, really difficult to get things to line up well again, to the point where you almost had to quit out of the game and get everything loaded up. And I understand these games link in heavily to a tech demo in terms of what the PlayStation's capable of, but I have never found any game system outside of the Wii to really be all that good with motion controls. So I really wish they would just move past trying to demonstrate the motion controls. Leave them in is a little bit of a gimmicky thing because I guess it's not that expensive to put them in. But I don't think they should actually be a major focus point for basically any game that's not coming out on a Nintendo system. Aside from that, the only other real complaint that I have is there are occasionally some enemies that look like little slimes out of Dragon Quest. And you can see a pink one on screen now. Sometimes these guys are really not that hard to deal with. Sometimes it seems like they have become sharpshooters and are capable of picking you out no matter how much you're trying to avoid them. I'm not sure if it really is just inconsistent in terms of their accuracy, if it's that I've gotten too focused on something else, so it's really probably mostly on me. Like, let's just be blunt here. Realistically, this is more than likely a me problem, because most of this game's programmed really well. It just seems like their tracking on their shots sometimes is just a little bit too good, and it gets a little bit too picky about whether or not you can actually dodge them. More so in the absolutely like ridiculously hard levels, like the very last one or two challenge levels, the slimes in it were super capable of picking you off. Could be that those were tuned up to make those levels even harder, but it was at the point where I did not like them. That's the only things that I can think of with this that really didn't feel fair. And by the way, even though the goo can track you better than the enemies that are actually shooting homing missiles at you, the homing missiles are actually not that hard to deal with. So, at the end of the day, the challenge levels aren't actually necessary to play the vast majority of the game and unlock virtually all the extras. You really don't need them to do that. You need them to get every single bot available. And a lot of the cosmetics, they're tied to unlocking the bots that are representing other game franchises. And so if you want all the cosmetics, then yeah, you'll need to get all the bots at some point. But it's not really necessary to play the majority of the game and to be able to enjoy the majority of the game. So I can't rightly penalize it for content that isn't really mandatory. Besides, they did genuinely provide a challenge, so it lived up to their name. Even if the regular levels are so easy, it can be jarring the first time you hit a challenging level that is actually hard. I would say that's probably the one real complaint with them, is that they are challenge levels, but there's no real transition from the stages to those. There's not a real difficulty gradient. The game stays pretty even for the most part, and then certain levels just jump up really hardcore in terms of difficulty. At this point, the game is a solid 9 out of 10 for me. If not for its gameplay alone, then for the fun I had playing with my daughter. So why would I still say that it's not my game of the year? It's because I don't really think it does anything new. I feel like a game of the year needs to be either innovative or revamping an old mechanic in some sort of innovative way. Astro Bot has a bunch of cameos from other Sony related IPs or just things that were really popular on Sony systems, but realistically, at the end of the day, it is basically a reskin Mario. I think it does it better than most of the modern Marios have. Like, they at least try to make things interesting, and it really doesn't seem like Nintendo's really doing all that much to innovate with Mario anymore. They just kind of keep rehashing the same stuff over and over, the same way that they're doing things with Pokemon. But I don't think Astro Bot is different enough to warrant a sort of Game of the Year nod. Especially when you start looking at some of its competition from that year. Some of it's really not that much worse, but something like Shadow of the Erd Tree, I think the only thing that really keeps this in competition with that for Game of the Year is that Astro Bot is a new IP, whereas Shadow of the Erd Tree was really just a spin-off of Elden Ring. It does play differently enough that it deserved its own separate nomination, but I can see that holding it back enough to give, at least from a critical point of view, Astro Bot a little bit of an edge. However, that really is sort of splitting hairs. I'm much closer, like at this point, I don't mind anymore that it was Game of the Year. For a little bit when I first started, I was like, come on, I'd never heard of this game. And that surprised me, but good games, you don't necessarily have to market that much. And since the tech demo was really how it was being pushed, I guess Sony saved a little bit of money on the advertising, or at the very least, Sony didn't advertise in a way that it reached me. Probably wasn't the target demographic for it, which is one of the reasons why I was just completely unaware of its existence. But I just assumed industry plant because it's Sony. And the big three always seem to get a property if they have a new one up listed for Game of the Year. They don't always win, but they usually get it there. So I assumed it was a bald victory because it slipped under my radar so thoroughly. Like, I had no idea it was as popular as it was. I still don't know that it was as popular as it was. I still kind of suspect that Sony's influence is what actually got it the nomination to begin with, but the quality of the game is what carried it to the win. So I don't know that it got in there, and I don't really think if this had been an indie game that it would have caught quite the same level of attention that Sony did. I actually think that it would have probably gotten more comparisons to Mario, and that would have probably held it back from winning. Of course, if it was an indie game, it also wouldn't have the metric ton of crossovers, so it wouldn't have been able to pull the nostalgia strings. The thing is, though, it is a good game. So even if some level of backroom dealing got it into the spotlight, it deserved it. The team that made it did a damn good job. This is a genuinely good game that can approach a very broad audience. And yeah, I would have picked something else, but I can appreciate that people that did pick it didn't make a bad choice. They just valued different things than I do for Game of the Year. And it's not one of those instances where I think they were objectively wrong. It's one of these things where I feel like personally it wasn't for me, but I can at least now understand why it won. I do think it was a good game. So I've kind of come around on that. And it's more than just the nostalgia that I now feel for it, because I really have enjoyed spending my time with my daughter playing it. It's that it is a genuinely good game. I feel the desire to play it sometimes even when she doesn't want to play it. I kind of resist it because it's become a thing for she and myself. But the fact that I actually do want to play it on my own speaks volumes towards the actual quality of the game. And it does scratch an itch that Nintendo, for whatever reason, refuses to scratch more than once per console generation. Now, if we could just get Sony to produce a sequel to it, which they probably will. I don't see them having a problem with it, depending on how quickly they decide they really want to push a PlayStation 6, which I'll just say bluntly, I think we should stick with this console generation. But anyway, it's a good game. Maybe it will actually push Nintendo to innovate a little bit as far as Mario goes and actually do something a little bit different with it. Although Power World didn't push them to do anything different with Pokemon. So, I don't know. We may be seeing Nintendo slowly starting to turn into the old man shaking his fist out the window at the young whippersnappers. Anyway, I enjoyed the game. I highly recommend it. If you have a system where you can play it, pick it up. If you like platformers at all, it is worth your time. It's not that difficult, but most platformers aren't. It is enjoyable though. It's got enough of a collectathon without being like the old school Banjo-Kazooies and stuff to where you really feel like you're doing a super hard grind. You'll put probably, I don't know, you'll put enough time into it to get your money out of it. Let me just put it that way. However much it costs you, you'll probably put enough hours into it that the cost per hour comes out to be fair. And at the end of the day, if I can beat it and come as close as to 100%ing it as I have, you absolutely can too. Good night.